So you took my advice in yesterday's video, which by the way, if you haven't watched yet, I will link in the description below because you need to watch that first. And you started taking a food journal instead of just jumping into the deep end and meticulously tracking calories. And maybe you got to a point now where you're 5-7 days in and you're starting to think, that's all well and good, Aaron, but what do I do with this information? What do I do with these photos? What do I do with these notes? That is what we're going to answer today. Here are some really simple things that you can do based upon what your food journal is showing you that are going to have a positive impact on your strength, on your ability to build muscle, on your body composition, on your recovery from your training sessions, on all sorts of things. So let's jump in. There are a few really simple things we're going to talk through. It's not going to be a super long video. So inevitably, now I've said that, it's going to be a really super long video or podcast, depending upon where you're watching it. By the way, if you haven't yet, please feel free to subscribe, like, comment, all that sort of stuff, or not. So the first thing that I want you to look at is going to be your protein intake. You don't need to know exactly how much protein you're eating to start with, and you may never need to know precisely. As a general rule of thumb, you're probably going to want between 1.8 grams of protein to 1.4 grams of protein to 1.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. I always get that wrong, and it makes a big difference if you don't use kilos and you use your body weight in pounds, because obviously it effectively doubles the math. So just make sure you're not doing that. Now, what this does is it gives us a kind of a bracket to hit. And as a general rule of thumb, so long as most days you're within that bracket, that's all you need to worry about. If you are slightly under the 1.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight for that day, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so have a bracket, have a guide or a target that is broad enough that you're not too worried if you're slightly over or slightly under, okay? There are going to be some days where you are at the upper end of that spectrum, and there are some days where you're going to be at the lower end, and most days you'll be somewhere in the middle. So now that we know that we're aiming for that sort of range, a really easy way to get there for most people is to make sure that you are having at least 3 servings of protein per day of between 30 and 40 grams of protein. You still don't have to track anything. This is usually pretty simple to do. If you open up your hand and you look at your palm, usually if you're having some sort of meat, if it's around the size of your palm-ish, that's going to be a good starting point. A large chicken breast, a small steak, something of that nature, a serving of fish. Another easy thing to do is if you are consuming something like high-protein yogurts, which are fantastic and cheap and easy to get in supermarkets, then it's going to tell you how much protein you're eating. And usually you can have 1 or 2 of those and comfortably hit 30 or 40 grams of protein. So you don't need to track things, you don't need to scan things, but you can just get 2 pots of protein yogurts and it says 20 grams of protein on each. And you know that if you have those 2 yogurts for breakfast, along with whatever else you're having, you've got 40 grams of protein. And this is usually pretty easy to tell on a food journal because, especially if you're taking photos, you will roughly be able to see the portion sizes of protein. If you are having salad and you don't have any protein with it, then you know for that meal, you're probably better off finding a way to include some protein. If you have a sandwich for lunch and you have a very small amount of protein, like a couple of slices of ham, you know that probably the easiest solution is not to start adding in protein shakes, but just to get a few more slices of ham in that sandwich or some chicken or something like that. If you sit down for dinner and you have a very small portion of chili with a little bit of beef in it, you know that you'll probably benefit from having a little bit more meat in there, and you can just cook the same thing, you just increase the portion sizes of the protein within that meal. So generally speaking, meat, fish, eggs, and dairy-based products that are high in protein are a fantastic start point. Dairy-based products, like I said, being high-protein yogurts, which you can get in so many supermarkets. Things like whey powder, whey protein combined make whey powder. I'm sure there's more jokes in there, but let's not get distracted. Again, another great option. And this stuff is usually fairly obvious if you're taking photos. You know, take a photo of your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner, you look at them at the end of the day and you think, okay, I didn't have any protein. I had a couple of slices of toast for breakfast. I had a croissant on the way to work with a coffee from Starbucks. I need to find a way to get some more protein in. So it's about identifying those easy changes, those easy wins. Increasing your protein intake and making sure you hit those targets on a daily basis is going to make sure you are building muscle tissue. It's going to make sure that if you're in a deficit, you're holding on to muscle tissue and you're not wasting away and losing all your strength and your power. It's going to make sure you're more satiated. So you're going to be less hungry. You can have less cravings. It's going to make sure you're recovering from gym sessions. So the next time you walk in the gym, you can perform really well. Like, it's one of the fundamental steps. It's one of the most important things that I look at. And one of the first things, if not the first thing I look at with every client that comes in. Another obvious thing that you can do when it comes to your food journal is you can have a look at the portion sizes of the calorifically dense foods that you might refer to as treats that you're having on a daily and weekly basis. I don't think any of us are under the assumption that having a whole bag of Maltesers probably aligns with our fitness goals. Like, everyone knows that eating loads of chocolate and loads of sweets and loads of crisps and loads of desserts is probably not a fantastic idea. But oftentimes we're not faced with the reality of how much we're eating until we actually see it. We see the evidence of it. So again, taking photos of, you sit down and you have a whole tub of Ben and Jerry's. At the end of the week, you can look through the volume of foods that you've eaten of that nature, and you can go, okay, what are some simple things I can do to not remove those, but to reduce the amount I'm eating? If it's something like ice cream and you're having a whole tub of Ben & Jerry's, which is 1,200 calories, are you happy getting a lower calorie alternative that's 300, 400, 500 calories? If not, can we reduce portion sizes? If you look at your weekly food journal and you're having a tub of Ben & Jerry's once a week, can you restrict that to half a tub? Can you make a tub last 2 weeks instead of one every week? You've halved the calories. If chocolate's your thing, chocolate's my thing. If chocolate's your thing and you're having whole bags of chocolate, can you get smaller portions and smaller servings and smaller portions of the same thing? If you love dairy milk, you can buy those single individual servings that are like 100, 120 calories, as opposed to a 100-gram bar that's 500 calories. You're still eating chocolate. You're still taking that box. I'm not trying to take your chocolate away from you, but you're just managing the sizes of the portions. And I think all of us are smart enough to know that. I think there's this idea that people aren't smart enough to know about their nutrition. You need loads of qualifications and all that. We all know that eating a 100-gram bar of dairy milk chocolate is probably not going to help us if we're trying to improve body composition. The issue isn't that we don't know that. The issue is that we sometimes forget we're even doing it. We sometimes forget how much we've eaten by the end of the week because we just pick here or there. We have a couple of donuts at work. We grab a croissant on the way into work sometime. We sit down and we have before you realize it, you smash back a whole bag of crisps. And on the day, that may not seem like a big deal because you just forget about it. Oh, it's just one day. But then when you look at 7 days worth of a food journal, in photos preferably, you will see just how much you're consuming. And again, the goal isn't to just cut it out. Like, that's unrealistic and that's not going to help in the long run. The goal is to probably manage the portion sizes of the calorifically dense foods that are probably leading to you gaining weight or at least stopping you from losing weight in the first place. So again, that's a really, really easy, obvious win. But it's not until you're faced with the reality of what you're doing that you realize what's actually going on. And if you're trying to rely on memory, if you're trying to look back and you haven't taken that food journal, you're always going to struggle because you're going to forget lots. Like, our recollection of stuff, our memory of anything is patchy at best. So those are two things you can do straight off the bat. Portion sizes when it comes to your protein intake and portion sizes when it comes to your calorifically dense foods. Another really obvious thing that a food journal is going to show you is actually how much you're eating in terms of fruit and vegetables and stuff like that. Again, a lot of us kid ourselves about how healthy we are and how much good food that we eat. And then we look throughout the day and we go, oh, breakfast and lunch didn't have any fruit and vegetables. Again, this is really low hanging fruit when it comes to health, longevity, all that sort of stuff. You don't have to be prepping and cooking loads of vegetables every meal. So a bit of advice I give to a lot of my clients who feel like they don't have time to, cook, prep, veg and stuff like that for dinner is just to bump up their fruit intake during the day. Things like raspberries, blueberries, apples, things that are fairly low in calories. So you're not going to have a ton of sugar. Not there's anything wrong with sugar from fruit, by the way, but let's not get into that. Raspberries, blueberries, apples, high in fiber, loads of vitamins, loads of minerals, really good for you. Really good for you, just really good for you, but there's no preparation time. You just have it in the fridge, you grab a handful or two, and that's you making a positive contribution to your health and well-being on that day. It requires zero prep. So again, you look through your week and you go, am I getting 5 servings of fruit and veg a day? Probably not. Okay. Do I need to start prepping 5 different vegetables for dinner? that's probably not realistic right now. Okay, what can I do? I know I can make sure I've got some blueberries and raspberries in the fridge. I can make sure I've got some apples in the cupboard or the fridge if you're weird, you keep them in the fridge, which some people do. And I realized I did the other week. I found some apples in the bottom of the veg drawer, which were definitely 2 months old. They were still fresh though, so maybe I'm onto something there. So again, I think the benefit of a food journal is actually it's relatively easy to do so long as you actually do it. It's relatively easy to do. It's you taking a photo 3 times a day plus snacks. And then at the end of the week, you sit down and you go, okay, what's some obvious things that stand out to me? And I actually think that every single one of you watching this video has enough common sense to realize or to see where the biggest changes or the easiest and simplest changes are. I don't think you need to have a qualification in nutrition in order to know that there's no protein in that meal. I don't think you need a decade in nutritional sciences to know that you're better off reducing a bag of Maltesers to a sharing bag of Maltesers to a small bag, or a 100-gram bar of chocolate to a smaller bar of chocolate. I've not had enough coffee today. I can't speak properly, or I've had too much. Either or. So that's why the food journal is important. It's really simple to do. You just have to do it. The first changes you make are probably going to be really bloody obvious, so you need to do those. And the initial solutions are fairly simple. Now, all that being said, there may and there probably will come a time where you need to take the next step. That might be tracking calories. But my point is this: a food journal is not necessarily the endpoint for everyone. It depends upon your goals, it depends on your lifestyle, it depends upon the time that you have available, it depends what you like to do. Some people like to track calories because they are that way inclined. They like the accuracy, the reliability, the meticulous nature of weighing stuff up and putting it in an app. So that's cool. But what I'm saying is that you don't have to start there. And what I'm saying is that for most of you, you shouldn't start there. You should start the easiest thing possible. There are lots of other things that you can do with a food journal. There are things like making sure you are potentially prioritizing your carbohydrate intake around tough training sessions if you are underfueled and struggling with your workouts. There are things that you can do like cycling your carbohydrates or calories. So if you don't train over the first 2 days of the week, you might look at your food journal and say, okay, I can reduce portion sizes on Monday and Tuesday, drop my calories down a little bit, and then I can even bump my calories up a little bit over the weekend where I have 2 really big tough training sessions and I need that extra fuel, I need that extra ability to recover. These are all decisions that you can make that are informed by what that food journal, what those pictures are saying to you. Again, it's not foolproof. It's not going to work for everyone, but it's a really good, simple place to start. And I think that most of us, regardless of whether we've got qualifications in nutrition, regardless of whether we are coaches or personal trainers, I think most of us can recognize a couple of much needed changes just based upon some photos. I don't think that you, who is watching this, necessarily needs in-depth nutritional changes straight away. My bias, my preference is always to put more focus and more attention to begin with into your overall activity and lifestyle, into how many steps are you getting a day, into how frequently are you training, into are you getting a mixture of strength training and cardiovascular exercise. That's where I start with my coaching. That's where I start with my clients. It's what's the easiest, simplest thing we can do with nutrition right now. And we're going to spend all our time and energy and focus trying to work out how I can get you to move more. What habits can we instill? What processes can we instill? How can we schedule your workouts? How can we build a training program that fits you, your likes, your injuries, your preferences, your goals, the equipment you have available, all that sort of stuff. And in part, and this is a separate tangent, or this is another topic, in part because there's only so much we can do with food. There's only so much we can restrict. There's only so much we can pull back. But the amount that you can move and exercise, we can always nudge that a little bit more. So that's why I take this approach to start with. You may want to start and in the deep end, dive in the deep end when it comes to your nutrition, and not worry too much about your activity levels and your training, your cardiovascular exercise, your resistance training. But in my mind, the training comes first, the activity comes first, because it's so important to meet those weekly guidelines. Are you challenging your muscles? Are you challenging your cardiovascular system? Are you being active? And then we make a few simple changes with the nutrition, and we make sure that what we're doing is working. body composition is improving, fitness is improving, strength is improving, and then we put our effort and our focus into driving the activity side, the output side, as much as we can, as hard as we can, as consistently as we can. And then we come back to nutrition and we go, okay, what's one or two simple changes we can make? Now, sometimes people do eventually get into tracking calories, but currently, with all the clients I work with, online and in person, I can count on one hand the number of clients that track calories every week. Everyone else, food journals, they use portion control sort of like methods and guidance. Some use intermittent fasting, all sorts of things. But like I said, very few of them actually want to or feel like they can track calories because of just how busy and chaotic life is. So we find alternatives. There we go. That's the video. So those are the next steps. Protein intake from your food journal. Portion control of your calorific dense foods from your food journal. Fruit and vegetables. Are you eating enough? If not, find some easy things to stick in. There we go. That's the video. That's the podcast today. If you found it useful, if you're still hanging around, leave a like, comment, subscribe, follow, all that stuff. I'll catch you in the next one.